On May 17, 2022, members of the United States House Intelligence Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, Counterintelligence, and Counterproliferation held congressional hearings with top military officials to discuss military reports of unexplained aerial phenomenon.
Do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General.
Has any of the activity been aggressive, been hostile in your reports?
I know of multiple colleagues of mine that got physically injured, and the activity. And I got
by UAPs or by people within the federal government?
Both.
If you were me, where would you look? Titles, programs, departments?
I'd be happy to give you that in a closed environment. I can tell you specifically.
And I would say, and I've told people that you have to know where to look. They're not going to divulge it to you because of the classification levels. But if you know where to look and who to talk to, which is exactly what Mr. Grift can point you, then you have them.
And in 2023, supposed whistleblower David Grush claimed that the U.S. federal government, working with private aerospace companies, have extremely secret special access programs that recover and reverse engineer what they call non-human spacecraft and their pilots.
Above congressional oversight with regards to UAPs, my testimony is based on information I've been given by individuals with a long-standing track record of legitimacy and service to this country.
Grush, alongside various other so-called whistleblowers, have come forward over the decades and proclaim that soon all of the documents will be revealed and the U.S. government will be forced to disclose the truth, that being that highly advanced extraterrestrial beings have been regularly visiting the planet Earth. And once this disclosure has happened and released to the public, our civilization will enter into a new age of technological and spiritual enlightenment. Well, it's 2025, and that disclosure hasn't happened, and never will. That is the unfortunate dark secret of UFO or UAP disclosure. Oftentimes, the people arguing that disclosure will happen any day now will employ something called the Mott and Bailey tactic. If you let them say their piece, uninterrupted, they will say some of the most outlandish things imaginable, but when pressed, they retreat into ambiguity and claim that they simply want the truth. But the real truth is this. These people are nothing more than a collection of grifters, using each other as sources to bolster their outlandish claims with no evidence, and in many cases, their claims are verifiably false. This is because they are not good-hearted people wanting to expose the truth, but instead pseudo-cult leaders fleecing money from their gullible followers. They have been so successful at fooling the public, they have even gotten the attention of the United States government and used taxpayer money to fund their cults. And since nobody has done a comprehensive deep dive look at the lore that these disclosure people push, I figure that should change, because I think people deserve to know what these people actually promote in their books, lectures, TV shows, YouTube panels, and so on. If you aren't interested in hearing some of the most outlandish ideas you've ever heard, and instead just want to know about how these people are grifters and how they tie into this lore that I'm about to explain, then skip to this timestamp. So, a quick disclaimer, because there is a lot, and I do mean a lot, of lore and mythology surrounding these various aliens. So I'm only going to cover what they call historical trigger events, or canon events as they're sometimes called ever since that one Spider-Man movie came out. As far as I know, it's not like there's an official text or Bible that they use. In fact, there are hundreds, if not thousands of variations of this lore with different alien races that use different names for organizations and secret government programs and such. What makes it more confusing is that because all these different UFO people contradict each other, they claim that on December 21st, 2012, a major timeline split occurred. To them, the entire timeline thing is also confusing. Some of these events were once considered canon to their story, but they aren't anymore, which they call timeline collapses. Or the events have been overwritten and happen differently than you remember, which they call timeline overrides. For the sake of explanation, I will be using what they call the Ascension timeline lore, which is at least a large portion of the UFO lore that is considered to correlate to our timeline post-2012, which can be referenced across a number of various different websites. But for me, I'm using one of their wikis called the Ascension Glossary. Before space and time, consciousness became aware of itself, splitting into two. This is the Mother-Father consciousness. The Mother-Father consciousness then expanded, creating the universe. Roughly 13.75 billion years ago, our local universe comes into existence. And when I say local, I mean this because there are indeed multiple universes and timelines. Our local universe is in the shape of a donut and contains 10 dimensions or densities of reality, which correspond to the Kabbalistic tree of life and the chakras of Hinduism, each level of the tree or chakra representing a dimension of reality, with the 3 lowest levels being 3D or physical reality, and everything above the 5th dimension being the realms of pure consciousness. In this early universe, the first inhabitants were a group of highly evolved souls which they call the Batal, 6th-density light beings who had volunteered for the task of shepherding the development of life in this new region of space and time. For billions of years, they developed and nurtured galaxies, systems, suns, and planets, much like we would take care of a garden, ensuring that they had the proper mix of primal elements to evolve in the direction that these founding races wanted. The first major event in history was the Lyran-Draconid War, which resulted in the aliens of the Lyran star system going from being 5th-dimensional beings and forcing themselves to incarnate into 3-dimensional bodies, which they call Lyran starseeds. Roughly 5 million years ago, the Electric Wars were a war between 7th-dimensional beings. Jesus, who is a Lyran starseed, wins, and humanity is created. 1 million years ago, the 1,000-Year War is a war between the Elohim and the Anunnaki, which destroyed the 6th-dimensional Stargate. The Anunnaki, who are aliens from the planet Nibiru, win and colonize the Earth, building ancient structures like the pyramids. 75,000 years ago, the Nephilim Wars follow the 1,000-Year War. The Anunnaki breed human-alien hybrids called the Nephilim, which leads to another war between the Elohim and the Anunnaki. This time, the Elohim win and the Nephilim are destroyed. Roughly 52,000 years ago leads to the Lemurian Holocaust, which occurred when the Anunnaki worked with reptilian draconids. The draconids wipe out the inhabitants of Earth, forcing them into the hollow Earth beneath them. This event also causes the Ice Age. 30,000 years ago, the first Atlantean cataclysm occurs when the Anunnaki invade the hollow Earth. This causes the Earth to tilt on its axis, and all of the ancient alien technology goes offline, like the pyramids. 26,000 years ago, the Luciferian rebellion occurs. Lucifer, who is an Anunnaki alien, begins a rebellion to try and take over the universe, but is stopped by an alliance of humans and aliens. In response, Lucifer creates the NAA, or the Negative Alien Agenda, sometimes also called the Negative Alien Alliance, their purpose to subvert the will of the good aliens. 22,000 years ago has a lot of different events surrounding the alien Thoth, who is also an Anunnaki alien, but whose story is largely irrelevant for the rest of this lore. 11,500 years ago, the Luciferian Covenant is born. It is an alliance between Lucifer and his aliens against the then Empire of Atlantis, which was in contact with a larger network of aliens called the Federation. This Luciferian Covenant ultimately culminates in the Second Atlantean Flood, which in turn destroys the Stargate under the Sphinx, disconnecting Earth from the Galactic Federation for now, and flooding the Atlantean Empire, wiping humanity back to the Stone Ages. 10,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians, under the influence of the alien Anunnaki stranded on Earth, rediscover the pyramids and restart human civilization. 9,500 years ago, in response to the return of humans, the Luciferian Covenant covertly create an elite group of humans who rule civilization from behind the scenes called the Knights Templar, aka the Freemasons, aka the Illuminati. 8,000 years ago, aliens from Alpha Centauri, who are also Anunnaki hybrid aliens, attempt to take over the Earth, but are ultimately repelled by Lucifer's evil aliens. In response, the Alpha Centauri aliens who are stranded build Stonehenge. 5,500 years ago, the Mayans, who are also aliens, take refuge on Earth and build civilization in South America. 3,000 years ago, King Solomon, who is an alien, uses psychic technology to enslave Lucifer and his demons, who are also aliens, to build the temple in Jerusalem in order to rule the world. However, the Draconids and the Luciferians team up and destroy the temple, freeing his alien subjects. 2,000 years ago, Jesus, who is a Lyran starseed, incarnates as a human being and spreads a message about the aliens in the town of Galilee, but is crucified by the Roman Draconids. The Draconids then corrupt Jesus' message and establish a false religion. In the year 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea convenes. The Roman Draconids use Constantine to hold the Council of Nicaea, which establishes the false religion of Christianity, which in reality is a satanic alien death cult. Around 780 years ago, the truth would continue to persist about the true message of Jesus, That being that Jesus was an alien, which was passed down to the Cathars, which the Catholic Church, which as we all know is a reptilian satanic death cabal, and the reptilian Pope orders the destruction of the Cathars in an attempt to suppress the truth that Jesus is an alien. However, the truth about the aliens would continue to spread in secret societies in order to counter the false Catholic Church. At one point, former ceremonial magician Aleister Crowley contacts a race of aliens called the Greys and use him to subvert ceremonial magic in these secret societies of the Golden Dawn for the reptilian Lucifer Alliance. All of this ultimately culminates into Hitler learning about the aliens and allying himself with the negative alien alliance. The evil aliens and their human conspirators are eventually defeated in World War II. However, history is not as it seems, as the war lasted much longer than people realize, and 78 years ago, the Roswell incident occurred when a gray alien ship was shot down by the US government and their alien allies, the Galactic Federation. Following this incident, World War II actually came to an end, and with its end, the United States government had to launch various secret space programs in order to strengthen its alliance with the Galactic Federation. However, the negative alien alliance may have been defeated, but they still conspired against the Galactic Federation, and in 2001 orchestrated several terrorist attacks in order to gain power within the US government. All of this ultimately led to a prophecy by the ancient Mayans that on December 21st, 2012, a massive timeline shift would occur, and most of history as we know it would be rewritten. However, this shift in the timeline will not stop our brave disclosure warriors who actively seek to reveal the truth. And when the US government finally discloses the truth about the aliens and their secret space programs, we will enter into a new age of spiritual and technological enlightenment. That day is coming any day now, and all you need to do to find out the truth yourself is to buy these people's books, watch their TV shows, listen to their podcasts, and so on. To recap, for anyone who skipped ahead or has no idea what's going on, I'll simplify the lore like this. According to the UFO disclosure people, there are two major factions. A group of aliens called the Federation, which the United States federal government is working with, opposes another group called the Negative Alien Agenda or the Negative Alien Alliance. But of course, what I'm showing on screen here is the tip of the iceberg, as this lore is incredibly complex and convoluted the more you look into it. So, where did all of this lore come from? And that's a difficult question, as it seems to be a mishmash of various different ideas, and it's constantly changing and being updated. So there's no consensus on where exactly this lore formed into its modern iterations that are preached by various members of the disclosure community. But I'll try my best to explain where they probably came from. As I see it, the UFO disclosure lore appears to be an offshoot of the theosophical concepts of Helena Blavatsky, combined with fringe theories about aliens that began with a man named George Adamski. These two concepts combined are what led to the larger part of the UFO disclosure lore. Regardless of which timeline of the lore you're looking at, there are always some key concepts that pop up time and again, and I want to explain exactly where these concepts come from. And as I do, we'll probably understand where all these ideas come together into the lore dump that I just recapped. So to break down the lore, we have the concept of starseeds, which are souls reincarnated from Earth from other planets. We have, of course, the gray aliens that pop up everywhere in alien stories. The Nordic aliens appear as almost albinoid humans with blue eyes. The Arcturians, also often identified with the Anshar, which is actually an ancient Babylonian deity. This also ties into recasting religious figures as aliens, like Jesus and the Buddha. And so, to the UFO disclosure lore, every religion is correct, but also wrong at the same time, as these various aliens have been misidentified as gods. Of course, you also have the reptilians, who are almost always evil in these stories. And then finally, you have the Lyrans, a group of alien catmen who are destroyed by the Draconids at the beginning of time, and who's largely responsible for these various souls or starseeds, who incarnate throughout the universe. So let's break down each element of the lore and see where it comes from and how it all came together. The concept of starseeds almost certainly come from the mind of L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. In Scientology, they hold on to the idea of Thetans, which are basically the souls of aliens that have been trapped on Earth by the evil alien Xenu. The concept of Thetans would be appropriated as the basis for the starseeds, and the first time this term appears is in a book by Brad Singer in his 1976 book, Gods of Aquarius, which is nearly 20 years after Hubbard and Scientology. The Greys are the most famous aliens of all, and many proponents of the lore argue that their origin goes back to ancient times, with many believing that old stories of fairies and fairy abduction were actually alien incidents. But as far as the anatomically modern depiction of the Greys is concerned, We don't get that description until the Betty and Barney Hill incident of 1965. The couple claimed to see a UFO while driving on the highway. Barney stopped their car and got out to look at the UFO, where he saw the pilots in the craft in its windows before he got back in the car and tried to drive away. But, according to them, he and his wife blacked out and awoke back in their car sometime later. They would report this incident to the police, and later on, while under the influence of hypnosis, they would draw the picture that would become identified as the gray alien, or at the very least, the prototype of what we would call gray aliens today. And since then, many more abductions describing these exact same entities have been claimed by various people across the globe. This first drawing I'm showing on screen now. Various skeptics have come forward and pointed out that prior to the hypnosis session, there was an episode of the TV show Outer Limits, which Barney likely drew inspiration from. I'll let you decide whether or not you believe this is true or not. In the 1950s, a man named George Adamski, a Polish American, was among the first to publicly report his alleged contact with the so-called Nordic beings. On November 20th, 1952, Adamski and several friends reportedly went to the California desert, near a town where they claimed to see a large submarine object hovering in the sky. Believing the ship was looking for him, Adamski claimed that he and his friends made their way towards the unknown object. Shortly afterwards, according to Adamski, a scout ship descended from the larger ship and landed close to him. Its pilot, an alien who he claimed was named Orthon from the planet Venus, spoke to him. After this encounter, Adamski basically claimed to have all sorts of wacky space adventures with his new alien buddies. Interestingly enough, Adamski would end up holding some of the earliest UFO conventions, which centered around his growing cult of personality. Adamski's cult would attract competitors, like the cult of George Hunt Williamson. Between these first two competing UFO cults, most of their competing stories would end up serving as a precursor to what would become the wider UFO lore that I've described in this video, and they were among the first to connect theosophy to the UFO phenomenon. Between the two's cult of personalities, they had some interesting adherents, which raises some questions. Like, why were so many later influential atheist skeptics like Carl Sagan, James Randi, and Paul Kurtz hanging out with UFO cults in the 1950s to the 1970s? Or why did George Hunt Williamson mysteriously disappear in the late 50s? And why was the CIA so invested in making sure these alien cults were successful? But those questions are irrelevant for now. The Arcturians, who are associated with the Anshar, are based on the readings of Dolores Cannon, an American hypnotherapist, and originate in the 1980s. The story of the Arcturians would later become heavily associated with the Anshar Alliance, which would be greatly expanded on by a man named Corey Goode in the 2010s. And Corey Goode is an interesting backstory that we'll talk about later in this video. The idea that all religions are actually based on alien encounters dates back to the 1960s through the 1970s, with a second generation of UFO cults following the deaths of Adamski and Williamson. Eric von Daniken wrote Chariot of the Gods, in which he claimed that ancient religions were actually misidentified encounters with extraterrestrials, which he claimed to have come to Earth to mine gold as a resource in the distant past, and were thus responsible for most of Earth's megalithic structures, such as Stonehenge and the pyramids. A lot of Eric's claims hold similar ideas, which tie back to the stories and lore of Williamson and Adamski, of which Williamson and Adamski themselves were taking core ideas from theosophy, namely the ideas of ancient proto-human civilizations like Atlantis. Eric's ideas would gain mainstream popularity thanks to the History Channel and the show Ancient Aliens, which explained the ancient alien hypothesis to a mainstream audience for the first time.
This was the original Chariots of the Gods that Eric von Daniken talked about. The flying magic carpets of the Arabian Nights stories. There are traditions in the Middle East of King Solomon having this airship and flying to different places in the Middle East, certain mountains, which are known as the Mountains of Solomon.
The reptilians, draconids, or reptoids as they're sometimes called, seem to also have their origins in theosophical offshoots. Our first reference to lizard men comes from Pulp Fiction writer Robert E. Howard. In his story, The Shadow Kingdom, which drew on theosophical ideas popular at the time, again such as Atlantis, in which a race of serpent or dragon men once ruled the lost continent. In Howard's story, the serpent men were described as humanoids, meaning human bodies with snake heads, and were able to imitate humans at will, who lived in underground passages and used their shape-shifting and mind control abilities to infiltrate humanity.
Then he released the hilt and recoiled, shaken, dizzy, the hand of death at his spine. For as he watched, Tu's face became strangely dim and unreal. The features mingled and merged in a seemingly impossible manner. Then, like a fading mask of fog, the face suddenly vanished, and in its stead gaped and leered a monstrous serpent's head.
This story would seemingly inspire a mainstream conspiracy theorist, David Icke, in the 1980s and 1990s.
these reptilian entities seem to operate, and again, it's not just reptilian. There are many different kinds of entities that do not have a human form that operate just outside of human sight, and history has recorded them as demons and all this stuff. But the reptilian part of it seems to be very significant to the controlling systems on the planet today. Would appear from the endless research that I've done and people I've talked to all over the world and all the rest of it put together, my own experiences sometimes, that what we're looking at are these hybrid bloodlines. Because of the hybrid nature of the DNA, the software program, they have a vibrational sympathy with that which interbred with them. And this doesn't have to be physical interbreeding either. So these bloodlines can be, quote, possessed, their emotional, mental faculties taken over much more easily than the general run of the population does not have that hybrid DNA, thus that vibrational sympathy, compatibility between the two energy fields.
But the most mysterious out of all of these alien races are the Lyrans. And for the life of me, I can't say for certain where it originates from. Unlike the various other concepts in the UFO disclosure lore, the Lyrans seem to pop up just randomly. As far as I can tell, there are only 2 secure references that I can find before 2013, in which Lyrans are described as a distinct alien race that has connection to the wider UFO lore: the Hukalo cult and a group called Energetic Synthesis. The Hukalo YouTube channel began in 2013 by a man named Jim Charles, but apparently Charles has been running his cult for a long while before that. The cult recently moved website domains and registered their old domain name, so when the group started is a mystery itself. Jim himself has of course claimed to be in connection with aliens most of his life.
Greetings, people of the earth. My name is Takur. I am part of an alliance called Grift. We are an alliance of 6 alien species. These species contain Arcturians, Lyrans, Pleiadians, Ugil, Thandorians, and friendly reptilians. We are here to help the Earth with its situations and to help it rise spiritually.
Meanwhile, the Energetic Synthesis seems to be a more likely candidate, being run by a woman named Lisa Renee since 2003. However, based off of internet archives of her website, she was originally just a standard New Age guru with no real references to aliens until 2007, and no references to Lyrans until 2013. So while I can't definitively say that Jim Charles and the Hukalo cult or Lisa Renee are the definitive creators of the Lyran lore, they do seem to be some of the strongest candidates as far as I can tell. If this is the case, then it seems likely that the Lyran lore is by far the newest lore, originating sometime in the late 2000s or more likely the early 2010s, probably sometime around 2013. But it definitely didn't get mainstream popularity within the UFO community till at least the 2020s. Now, I know there are definitely some UFO believers who will try to dismiss everything in this video for even talking about the lore, saying things like, "How dare you try to lump us all in with those woo-woo guys, we just want disclosure." Many within the UFO disclosure community have tried to distance themselves from this lore, calling it woo-woo or nonsense. This is also why, in part, they've tried changing the name from UFO to UAP, to distance themselves from the rich history of the crazy UFO speculation. Well, the reason that I bring up the lore is that despite what UFO disclosure believers say, the lore is still intrinsically tied to all of the mainstream UFO or UAP darlings who speak about and have appeared before Congress. And I think it's time that we actually meet some of these darlings. But before I do, I want to give a quick shout out. Truth be told, the information on these various UFO grifters is extremely extensive. So, like the UFO lore, I'm only going to be really scratching the surface with these buffoons. If you want to see deep dives on any of these individuals and various scams that they've done over the years, I'd recommend you check out a channel called Truth Seeker Show on YouTube. The host, Stephen Cambion, has been exposing the lies of the UFO community for well over a decade now, and has hundreds of hours of proof of all of these guys being complete and total frauds.
Right? It doesn't make any sense. And you know what else doesn't make sense? The fact that God's greatest angel of creation, the Archangel Michael, would come to David Wilcock and tell him to take baths in his own urine. Why would an angel tell you to do something that is disgusting, that is a health hazard? You can't just take baths in your own piss. That's bad for your skin. That's bad for your health, right? And I don't understand how the Archangel Michael is coming to David Wilcock and telling him things like, you're going to get a ticket, and that's my gift to the world. Like, none of this shit makes any sense, right? The ancient aliens guy is going to be super Christian and talk to the Archangel Michael now?
And most of the information exposing these frauds has been made public thanks to his hard work, so I'll be linking his channel in the description. So let's quickly explain who each of these people are, and I'll show you the basics of how we know that they're frauds. Starting first, we have Bob Lazar. In 1989, Lazar claimed to have been involved in a classified US government project focused on the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology at a secret site near Area 51.
Our government scientist has alleged that the U.S. military is flying recovered UFOs at a secret base in the Nevada desert. The allegations about the secret facility near the Groom Mountains first surfaced on Eyewitness News last Friday.
Scientist Bob Lazar says there are at least 9 of the flying saucers being tested and that they were not built on Earth. George Knapp has more in the continuation of our series on UFOs.
Yeah, well, it's obvious it came from somewhere else other than Earth.
Scientist Bob Lazar is convinced that the technology he saw being tested at a secret base in the Nevada desert is of alien origin, and for Lazar, the proof is at least partially in the furniture. One of the 9 flying discs he says he saw at the base, which was designated S4, looks exactly like this UFO photographed in Europe. Lazar called it the sport model.
I gave everything simple names. There's the top hat one, and the Jello mold, and the sport model operated, without any hitches at all. I mean, it looked new. If I know what a new flying saucer looks like. One of them looked like it was hit with some sort of projectile. It had a large hole in the bottom and a large hole in the top with the metal bent out, like some sort of, large caliber 4 or 5 inch projectile had gone through it.
Even before he saw the sport model operate, Lazar says, he suspected that the ship came from somewhere else. The realization slapped him in the face the first time he glimpsed the inside of the disc.
I got to look inside, and it had really small chairs, and I think that was the first confirmation I had. That was just a shocking thing, because every time before that I was able to label it, well, this is just a little advance that a group of scientists had formed, and they're keeping it secret, and yeah, we could have built a big disc like that, that's no problem, and we could have adapted these to make it fly, but why does it have little furniture inside, essentially little seats, and things began to click together just all too fast.
A few of the discs had been completely dismantled to find out how they worked, Lazar says, but others were fully operational. A Japanese TV network created this animated version of Lazar's story after his first interview with us aired in May. Lazar says the dramatization is similar to a test flight he witnessed.
The bottom of it glowed blue and began to hiss like high voltage does on a round sphere. It's my impression that the reason that they're round and have no sharp edges is to contain the high voltage. Like if you've seen on high voltage systems, insulators, things are round or else you get a corona discharge. In either case, it began to hiss. It's in high voltage, and it lifted off the ground quietly, except with that little hiss in the background, and then that stopped as soon as it reached about 20, 30 feet.
Lazar says the test of the sport model was a short one, that it made only a few moves before setting back down. He didn't see who was actually flying the craft, but was very impressed nonetheless.
Well, there's no action-reaction system to it. There's no, like in a jet engine, exhaust gas being thrown out, no propeller, no noise. It's just, for all intents and purposes, magic.
To Lazar's knowledge, the flying discs are not being used for, say, any flights to Jupiter. He says excessive caution and intense secrecy contributed to the plodding pace of the program and were a main source of his disenchantment.
It's just unfair, outright, not to put it in the hands of the overall scientific community. There are people that are much more capable of dealing with this information, and by this time would have gotten a lot further along than this select group, select small group of people working out in the middle of the desert. They don't even have the facilities really to completely analyze what they're dealing with.
Well, he was being quiet, and if he kept me abreast of anything, he kept me abreast of the security checks. They'd randomly drop by his house. They threatened his wife. They threatened his wife's life. They had done all that, so we really didn't converse. I mean, he really was adhering to the program.
Gene Huff is a Las Vegas real estate appraiser, a regular guy who just happens to have a friend in the flying saucer business. He learned about Lazar's S4 experiences only after a long period. Lazar is anxious for people to know that he didn't just run right out and spill the secrets of the universe, and that some things are properly kept confidential.
I did not believe that this should be a security matter. Some of it, sure. But just the concept that there's definite proof, and we even have articles from another world, another system. You just can't not tell everyone. A lot of people don't believe that, but I do.
When he reached what felt like his bursting point, he took Huff and a few others to the edge of the Groom Mountains to see the flights for themselves. A total of 5 witnesses on 2 consecutive weeks managed to dodge security patrols long enough to see the strange glowing object lift above the mountains.
It came up above the same mountain. It moved around. It did a step move. It actually went up in the air like this and hovered, then dropped way down. Then it just floated around and cruised around, and then it started coming up the mountain range.
This home videotape was recorded during one of the trips to the Groom Mountains.
No way, did you see that move it did?
No, I didn't.
It went
Because
like
I kept
it went whoom, whoom. Wow, look how bright it's getting.
Look at it now.
Getting bright.
Not bright enough for me to get the son of a bitch.
Here, hold on, right here. Are you there?
No.
It is bright right now.
Admittedly, the tape proves very little by itself because with the distance and darkness, there are no reference points other than the alleged flying disc. But Lazar's information about the time and location of the test flights proved correct, not once, but twice. That, according to our off-camera interviews with each of the other witnesses. Gene Huff describes his second sighting.
Through the telescope, we had seen it was an elliptically shaped light. You know, that's about, because you can only get so close, even with a telescope, to a secure facility. Anyway, it came by up by us very rapidly. It glowed and glowed brighter like a sun, and we almost got the feeling it was going to explode. It glowed so bright, and we backed up behind the car. Then it went down. It glowed back up a little bit, and very softly glided back over back where the mountains where it came up, hovered for a while, and then just sat down, just like you see in the movies.
Bob Lazar isn't the only person to claim inside knowledge of the flying discs at the test site. He's just the only person to say so publicly. We have communicated with several people who say they know of the saucer program. A technician in a highly sensitive position told us it is, quote, common knowledge among those with high security clearances that recovered alien discs are stored at the Nevada test site. A Las Vegas professional who once served in the military and was stationed at the test site says he saw a flying disc land outside the boundaries of Area 51, that it was quickly surrounded by security personnel, and that he was taken away and debriefed for several hours. A man who once worked at Groom Lake as a technician, at our request, wrote this letter explaining how he inadvertently walked into the wrong hangar and saw what appeared to be a large metallic disc under a tarp. It was being examined by men in lab coats. And an airman who worked at Nellis at a radar installation says he and his fellow servicemen watched over a period of 5 nights unusual objects flying over the Groom Mountains. He says the radar images indicate the object zoomed into range at speeds of 7,000 miles per hour and then would stop on a dime, and that nothing we have is capable of doing that. The airman says that when word of his sighting got out, he was ordered to turn off his radar sensors for that area and told to keep quiet about the matter because it did not happen. None of this means that the military is actually flying alien spacecraft in the Nevada desert. It could all perhaps be explained as some other secret program. Lazar insists that's not the case. We put the matter to the U.S. Navy, which, according to Lazar, is running the saucer show. 4 different naval offices were contacted. All denied having any information in their files. The Naval Research Lab said it conducted a thorough search but found zip. Naval Intelligence said much the same thing, adding it is not required to create a file where one doesn't exist. A side note, we also requested files on a UFO sighting over Tremonton, Utah in 1952. The Navy spent more than 1,000 hours studying film of that sighting, a fact that's been noted in several publications. But for purposes of our request, the Navy couldn't find those files either.
The group that runs this project, whether it really is the Navy or they just say that, apparently these people have executive power. They don't report to anyone.
Tomorrow, more troubling allegations about the military potential of alien technology. George Knapp, Eyewitness News 8.
He would first tell the story to investigative reporter George Knapp in May of 1989, live on television that his job was to help the reverse engineering of one of 9 extraterrestrial flying saucers. And throughout the years, Lazar has expanded on his original story with more fantastical details. It was from this story that the UFO disclosure community really began its modern iteration, as various people began demanding that the US government show the world the proof of extraterrestrial life which they were hiding. Basically, George Knapp launched his career, as well as the UFO disclosure community and its modern iteration, with Bob Lazar, and gave it credibility with the Skinwalker Ranch story in the 2000s. However, it wasn't until the late 2010s that the UFO disclosure community would go mainstream and become a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it's in part where our next grifter comes into play, Stephen Greer. Greer founded the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or CSETI, in 1990 to create what he calls a diplomatic and research-based initiative to contact extraterrestrial civilizations. In 1993, Greer founded the Disclosure Project in response to the growing interest in UFOs following the Bob Lazar story. The goal of the project is to pressure the U.S. government into publicly disclosing the government's alleged knowledge of UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, and advanced energy and propulsion systems. CSETI claims to have over 3,000 confirmed reports of UFO sightings by airline and Air Force pilots. Greer himself has made many outlandish claims about contacting members of secret space programs and aliens from the Galactic Federation that appear in the UFO disclosure lore.
Being young and I kind of got on the ground. I hate to admit this now, sort of in the fetal position, sort of like, what is this? And it had this beautiful almond-shaped eye, like deer eyes. But it was an extraterrestrial biological life form. And he came up to me and touched me on my right shoulder. And whatever happened, the electromagnetic effect of it, all my hair, I had more hair then, stood on end completely. And I was totally electromagnetized. And subsequently, we went from there, and in an instant, went on board this craft. And what happened after that is sort of metaphysical, in the sense that we seem to dematerialize and then appear out in space, and I was sitting with these other extraterrestrial beings in a meditative state. And people say, well, what were they saying? I said, it wasn't about saying, it was about being. But what we did was that I was teaching them what it was like for a young man, to be in cosmic consciousness as a human. And then that's where we met. We met in that state of cosmic consciousness. And then we created what's known as the CE5 protocols, the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind protocols. That's where they came from. And basically I began to practice this ability with them to see them in the mind's eye and then vector them to a location and have an encounter. And they told me that at some point this would be very important to know how to teach other people.
However, in the late 2000s and early 2010s, the alien grift dried up in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. Several alien and paranormal shows like The X-Files were no longer at the air, and interest began to dry up. The only thing keeping interest in aliens alive at that time would be the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, which premiered in 2009, as well as the various doomsday cults that sprung up surrounding the Mayan calendar in 2012. This is where our next major grifter comes into play, Jeremy Corbell. In 2018, Corbell launched his career with the documentary Hunt for the Skinwalker, which was based on George Knapp's book surrounding the Skinwalker Ranch story.
global public is not ready to have global confirmation of this, a lot of disturbing things will occur. It's just too powerful.
Skinwalker Ranch. This is like the Area 51 of the paranormal.
It was not a single phenomenon. There were a host of things that happened.
Have there been experiences there that have shaken the Pentagon and CIA and other agencies? Absolutely.
Later that year, Corbell directed a documentary called Bob Lazar, Area 51, and Flying Saucers. This documentary, which premiered on Netflix in 2019, told the story of Bob Lazar for a new generation.
This story is extraordinary, especially if it's true. And it all started in the desert, just north of Las Vegas.
A local scientist who worked at Groom Lake
Said to be where top-secret weapons systems have been tested over the years.
He has asked that his identity be shielded.
Exactly what's going on up there?
What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. Physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence.
What would happen to you if the government learned that you were giving us this information?
He just wanted to stay alive.
Maybe this has been kept from us for a good reason.
Sir, how do we know you are who you say you are?
My name's Bob Lazar. I'm known for working at a classified base and reverse engineered alien spacecraft.
And thus, the UFO disclosure community went from a fringe conspiracy group to mainstream nearly overnight. As of the 20s, these are the main figures that are responsible for modern-day discussions about UFO disclosure. There's just one problem. The tactic they use is called information laundering. By using each other as sources, they're able to obscure the fact that all of the information is insular, which means that no one from outside of their sphere of grifters can corroborate anything they claim. So what happens when you look critically at the story of Bob Lazar, like Stephen Cambion has done? Well, it falls apart. The story of Bob Lazar is a near verifiable hoax. As a part of his story, he claims to have been a scientist working for Area 51, examining the wreckage of the Roswell, New Mexico incident. There are two problems with the story. Firstly, he claims to have been an MIT graduate with a master's degree in physics, as well as holding a master's degree in electronics from Caltech, and those credentials are what got him into Area 51. Yet, at every opportunity to prove that he actually worked as an MIT graduate, by simply showing off his diploma, Lazar, Knapp, and Corbell have refused to provide any evidence of this.
The question I had was, what was the year of your graduation from MIT, and did you get a PhD?
No, it's a master's degree. What was the year of graduation? Probably 82, because I think I left there.
Went to Los Alamos?
I went to Los Alamos.
Could you reveal some of your professors at MIT and Caltech?
Yeah, if you want. I don't have a list of them here. Dr. Duxler, I think, was one of them, and Hosefield was another.
Hosefield?
Hosefield. Hohsfield or something along those lines.
They remember you?
Oh yeah, Hosefield I know well. Oh sure, I've got people that that I went to school with, and George Knapp has spoken to some of them.
I certainly have trouble with Bob's claimed credentials at schools. He had claimed to have degrees from MIT and Caltech. Now I've talked to people who saw him at Caltech, but there's no records there. I think it is entirely possible that he would exaggerate his educational background in order to get a great job. He wouldn't be the first person to do that. He wouldn't be the first person to lie about his background and education in order to get a good job. And you have to wonder, well, wouldn't the people who hired him know that? And yeah, they would have to. They do a background check. They'd have to know that.
Robert Scott Lazar, supposedly a nuclear physicist with a master's in physics from MIT, a master in electronics from Caltech, who supposedly worked at Area 51 back engineering flying saucers, figured out how they work using element 115. It's a long, detailed story. You can buy the videos someplace else, not from me. I did a lot of checking on Bob. I tried to meet with him twice. I was supposed to on one occasion, and he didn't go along. I checked at MIT. I checked at Caltech. Neither one ever heard of them. Well, but the government wiped his records clean is the response. I talked to the legal counsel at MIT. No way to do that. I talked with the guy who has the degrees, the commencement lists and all that sort of thing. No mention of Lazar. None of the yearbooks show Lazar. You need it for a master's thesis. Well, for a master's degree, you need a thesis. I talked to the guy who holds those. No Lazar item there. He was asked publicly, when did you get your master's from MIT? Well, let me see now. I think it was, probably 1982. I have friends who went to MIT. I was accepted there myself, couldn't afford to go out of high school. And nobody who gets a master's degree in physics from MIT doesn't know what year he got it in. He was asked to name some of his professors. Well, let's see now. He named somebody, Bill, somebody, I won't use his name on the air. I checked on him. It was not a common name, fortunately. He was a physicist. The only trouble is, Bob said he would remember him from Caltech. This individual, Bill, never taught at Caltech. He only taught at Pierce Junior College. Now, Bob himself had mentioned Pierce to me on the phone. He did go there. Now, that's in Southern California, and he was going there at the same time that he was supposedly attending MIT, 2,500 miles east of there. One heck of a commute. If you can go to MIT, you don't go to Pierce Junior College. But beyond that, I checked with his high school. He finished in the bottom third of his high school class. You can't get into MIT if you're outside usually the top 10, 15, 20% of your class. Bottom third, never. His element 115 scheme won't work. Sounds good, science fiction. So, I checked with Los Alamos. He is in the phone book there. Doesn't that prove that he was a scientist working there? No, it certainly doesn't prove he was a scientist, but if you look at the phone book page, up at the very top it says, this phone book for employees of the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the Department of Energy, Kirk Meyer Corporation, several other companies. Right after Bob's name, and he was only in one phone book issue. They issue them every several months. It says K/M. That's Kirk Meyer, a subcontractor. He worked out at the Maison facility. Don't need a clearance for that. People come in from all over the world, physicists, to do experiments, and he was a technician working out there. And the story goes on and on beyond that. And I get people telling me, well, I don't see why you don't believe him. He seems so sincere. Sincerity is not a check on truth.
According to Bob Lazar, now this is his claim, he has a master's degree in physics from MIT and also a master's degree in electronics technology from Caltech. He has never produced his original master's degree from either MIT or Caltech. He's never produced it. It's a no-show. There's nothing there. He's never been able to produce the original master's degree. And every effort to locate those degrees has completely failed, including the research by Stanton Friedman. Also, I've got a copy of the MIT yearbook during the early 1980s. Stanton Friedman did a very investigative search of the early 80s yearbooks. There's nothing there. There's no name, there's no picture. He doesn't appear in any of the yearbooks. So that's a red flag that we need to look at. I've got a letter here to John Andrews from Robert Kiesler, dated March 19th, 1990, talking about his efforts to find Bob's magnetohydrodynamic master's thesis from MIT. And it says, "Dear Mr. Andrews, I am sorry we are unable to locate a copy of Mr. Robert Scott Lazar's thesis on MHD in our facility." Let's review this. According to Lazar, then, the government not only wiped out his degrees, his both degrees, they wiped out all of the yearbooks. So in essence, they had to crawl up into the dusty ceiling attics of all the graduates from MIT and steal the yearbooks out. And then they also scrubbed his magnetohydrodynamic master's thesis. It's completely gone from every repository. That just doesn't sound logical or reasonable to me, if he's telling the truth.
It was 1990. I was working at CNN, and I was a producer, And I got a call in Atlanta at CNN at my office from Bob Lazar. And he said, we're going to be doing something on Memorial Day here. If you can get here, we'd like to have you come and be part of the festivities, and we can talk about, by then it had been very controversial, about whether or not Bob Lazar with John Lear, had Bob Lazar been telling the truth about going to Area 51, working for EG&G, all of that. So I went to Las Vegas, met with all of those guys, and was able to spend a lot of time on that Memorial Day weekend, and I believe it was 1990. And here is the moment of talking with Bob Lazar that is indelible in my mind. He was showing me in his kitchen how he ran this film for the real estate offices that he worked for, filming houses. And he was in the process of demonstrating how he was doing that, just to show me that this is what he did. And he had told me that when Stanton Friedman had questioned him about the fact that he had no degree from MIT, he said, I never ever said I had a degree from MIT or anything like that. What happened, Linda, is I'm an adopted child, and my parents lived in Florida, and they didn't make much money. And I had gone to school with some buddies. We liked electrical things, we liked engineering, we liked taking cars apart. And some of my buddies got accepted to MIT. He said, I drove up to see them as my friends, and I went to one of their classes for a few days. He would just go and sit. And he said, and I learned some things. I became even more interested in having some kind of a career in which I would be dealing with electronic and engineering things. And he said, that's what I learned at MIT. I never told anybody I had a degree. That's Bob's firsthand version to me.
This is the most bothersome part of the story, and I've talked to Bob many times. I think we're friends. I have offered him the opportunity to tell me, Bob, did you exaggerate about your educational background? Because a lot of people do that. You know that in every walk of life, in every occupation, they would exaggerate something on a resume, and he's always stuck to it. As for professors, he gave me the name of one at MIT. I checked on that. The professor is not there now. Whether he was there then, when Bob says he went there, MIT would not give me that information. I do have one person who says he went to school with Bob, or at least was aware that Bob was going to classes at Caltech. His name is Jim Tagliani. He was a technician in the stealth fighter program here in Tonopah, Nevada. He worked with Bob in the early 1980s at a place called Fairchild Zincom Systems in Simi Valley. I have some documentation to back that part of it up, and he said he remembers Bob as working a lot of weird shifts to accommodate his classes there. The only record we can have for Bob Lazar ever in college is a single class in electronics at a junior college in California.
Right.
And you don't get hired at Los Alamos with that kind of an educational background.
So, if Bob Lazar does not actually hold 2 master's degrees, then he couldn't have been a scientist doing research at Area 51. Of course, Greer is by far the most outlandish of the mainline grifters, and has claimed some very strange things. Like in one case, he claimed getting superpowers from the Galactic Federation of Aliens, which of course, at every opportunity to demonstrate said superpowers, he refuses.
He also was read into and had the chief scientist show him the location, which...
This is another thing. There's these illustrations in this thing, and you see that thing in the background? I think those are porta potties. I'm not sure, but I think they're porta potties. And according to these illustrations, there's these secret underground bases that are big enough for like hundreds of people to work in. And apparently they're so secret that the government just lets everybody park their car right outside the secret base. And listen, if you got to take a dump, there's porta potties. There's porta potties outside the secret underground bases. So if you got to, listen, sometimes maybe you just got to, you're driving to work, you got to take a big dump. And maybe they don't have bathrooms in the underground secret alien bases where they're working on the alien spacecraft. They have such technology that they can back engineer alien spacecraft, but they can't figure out how to put a bathroom in that bitch underground. Instead, they got porta potties all along the back row. And this base is ultra top secret. It is housing the most secret things on planet Earth. The greatest secrets of the United States shadow cabal, black budget government, the deep state. It's the most secret base of the deep state, but we're going to put a row of all these porta potties out there, and we're just going to let everybody park their cars right outside where you go into the secret base. And listen, they would not do that. There's Russian satellites that would pick this up in a minute. In a minute! There's Chinese satellites that would pick this up in a minute. You don't put an underground base somewhere and then just let hundreds of people come to work and park right outside in a row and then put porta potties in case people have to take a shit. Oh my God, this is so stupid. What am I doing here?
We now have a underground military
This
base
is serious stuff.
that is in the Dugway sector, so-called Avery sector, Avery.
All right, and that's another thing. He said it's in the Dugway Proving Grounds, so we can look on satellite maps. And as ridiculous as it sounds, I went looking for big rows of cars and porta potties out by the Dugway Proving Grounds, and I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find shit. So is this fake? Well, this is another anonymous source. And if you look at the logic and the ridiculousness of this whole thing, I think you might agree that this is probably a tall tale. And by the way, there's more illustrations with the porta potties and the cars, I think.
Has huge capacity for parking. You go in, and there's a vast underground complex in that location. That location has been handed off to investigators.
And here's the thing, if there's huge capacity for parking, why is everybody parking their car on the surface then? This makes no sense. This is a total contradiction.
With the U.S. government. Next. This gives an illustration of the size of this. You could put easily on the platform that goes down the Air Force One. It's a very large elevator goes down.
I told you. Okay, so this location has been handed off, according to Greer, with investigators with the U.S. government. Which investigators? Which department is investigating this? Can we have their names? Oh, of course not. But what we can get is, see, there's the entrance to the underground base. Looks like a little shed there next to the porta shitters. I'm sorry, I can't get over the porta potties. Why would you just have a parking lot outside a deep underground military base where everybody can park and shit? This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I'm sorry. There are underground bases, but they don't look like this on the surface. The point of an underground base is two things. Usually bunkers to prevent a nuclear, anything nuclear from reaching them, or to provide secrecy to work on things, I would think. It kind of blows the secrecy thing out when you got, 25 porta potties and 100 or 150 cars out there. And this makes no sense. Why would people not? You got enough space under there for the Air Force One and helicopters and a train, but you don't got enough space for people to park?
Nice.
And you don't got bathrooms? Why don't they got bathrooms in a deep underground base? You're like, listen, this is so stupid and so ridiculous, right? Imagine the scientists that work there. Listen, I would like to keep trying to back engineer this alien spacecraft, but I really got to take a shit, so I got to go up top. I got to go topside and use the porta potty. I got to go topside and take a shit, before I can continue to back engineer this alien spacecraft. This is so stupid. And as stupid as this is, imagine the idiots that helped hype this, that helped this man take money from people for this level of stupidity, this level of illogical, childish, nonsensical stories that don't make sense.
And this is how the wider UFO lore not only entered the early UFO disclosure community, but was also largely shaped by the intermingling of various grifters. And this is a major divide in the UFO disclosure lore community. The more optical, we just want disclosure of George Knapp, and the woo-woo crowd of Stephen Greer. The two have a tenuous relationship, but a relationship nonetheless.
Them what they think of Stephen Greer's CE5 protocol.
Well, I think it's worth a try. You know, I had a chance to interview some guys who they are sort of like the prophet Yahweh. It's this guy who 20 years ago said he could call in UFOs, and he'd go out and meditate and try to draw things in, and sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't.
Knapp himself is also no stranger to woo-woo. Just look up the Skinwalker Ranch story for more details on some of the outlandish things that he has encountered. But I think George Knapp recognizes how outlandish and discrediting all the various UFO lore sounds, so he tries to avoid it, for the most part. The problem is that there's a lot of money from the woo-woo crowd that Knapp wants to be able to grift off of, so I doubt he'll ever fully denounce the woo-woo crowd entirely, except in that one rare instance when they had no other choice. In 2022, there was a massive scandal that caused a near full-on schism within the UFO disclosure community, and ultimately ended in the excommunication of Corey Goode from their cult, and is arguably one of the main reasons why they tried to shift from UFO to UAP. For those who don't know, David Wilcock and Corey Goode are former Gaia television hosts and on-camera personalities turned UFO grifters.
And that really began my whole experience within 6 months of near-death experience, exploring consciousness, and then from there, sort of creating the CE5 contact protocols where humans make contact with these civilizations directly. Wow. And it was all because of this sort of amazing consciousness exploration that happened.
David Wilcock himself has long been into fleecing victims out of their money. In 2015, Wilcock would host the show Cosmic Disclosure, where he would work with Corey Goode. On Cosmic Disclosure, Wilcock would form his own separate internal cabal of UFO grifters, which ended up having a lot of overlap with Knapp and Corbell, as well as Stephen Greer's cabal. But unlike the various other UFO disclosure cabal leaders, David Wilcock is by far the most willing to openly talk about the Greys, Lyrans, Draconids, Pleiadians, Starseeds, the Anshar, the Federation, and so on, with no sense of optics whatsoever. Because of this, Wilcock and Goode attracted some of the most outlandish claims about UFOs, with one of the most absurd claims that David Wilcock has ever stated was the claim that he was in fact molested by aliens.
And these things were done to me against my will. The people who molested me did so against my will. They did it on stage. They did it in front of large audiences. And they were making fun of me because I had special abilities in this ultimate personality that they created. I had telekinesis. And so if you go back to some of the dreams that I posted online in 1997, there's a dream where I'm in my school cafeteria and everyone in the audience is in a robe. And they all have their way with me, make them a banana sandwich. And I didn't realize when I wrote that dream down that it was true, but that I couldn't remember because the memories were taken away from me. But now I do. Now I remember.
Yet somehow, Wilcock's buddy, Corey Goode, was even more outlandish than Wilcock himself, claiming to possess knowledge of a secret space program involving hidden technologies and collaborations between humans and non-humans. And this is what caused the downfall of Corey Goode and the Wilcock cabal. Corey Goode was more than willing to expand on the established UFO lore with his own ideas, greatly expanding on concepts like the Arcturians and the Anshar Alliance. Another example is that Corey Goode created the idea of MILAB, or Military Abduction Programs, in which the US government would kidnap children and train them to fight alien monsters in space. which Corey Goode claimed to be one of their members. Goode also created something called the Sphere Being Alliance, a supposed alliance of alien races not belonging to the Draconids or the Federation. One of the most prominent elements of his SBA was a new race of aliens which he called the Blue Avians. The trouble started to brew for Corey Goode when various random people started claiming that they had also had contact with the Blue Avians, or that they had also been a part of a military abduction program or a secret space program. These people would also try to enter the UFO Grift circuit and make a lot of money. Because of his greed, Corey Goode would try to take legal action against these people, claiming they stole his ideas. This would ultimately culminate in a Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, lawsuit against Gaia and Corey Goode. Goode, rather than taking the sensible solution and settling or not having this go to trial, instead tried to fight it to the bitter end. During Corey Goode's deposition, he admitted on camera and under oath that he made up all of his claims. That deposition was made public thanks again to Stephen Cambion. Again, linked to his channel in the description.
Okay. Because of that, what did that cause you to do with this secret space training?
What did it cause me to do?
Yes. Like, for instance, you've said you've done 20 and back journeys where you go away for over 20 years and you come back.
Yep, trademark.
And, okay. And you've done that, and you've done that many times, right?
Correct. That's the dramatization on top of the story. Like I said...
Are you saying it's dramatization or is it real?
Part of it's real, part of it's dramatization. Like I've said about all of this.
What part is dramatization?
Be more specific, please.
Sure. What part of the 20 and back is dramatization and not real?
Well, the 20 and back itself is my creation. That's why I trademarked it, and that's why it's a part of my intellectual property.
So does that mean it's not real? It's dramatization?
What does it matter if it's real or not?
I'm asking you whether it was dramatization or was it real?
It's a real part of my dream or delusion, of whatever you want to call it. I created all of this as on top of the training that I did have and the experiences that I did have. I extrapolated this stuff out and created it.
Okay, but it's part of your dream or delusion, you call it, correct?
With whatever y'all want to call it.
Well, what do you call it?
I call it my intellectual property.
Okay. And you state you've gone away for over 20 years and you come back and you haven't aged, correct?
Well, the 20 and back story in the book is that you're taking off planet, you serve 20 years, your age regressed, and you're put back in time to where you were first removed.
Is that the story or is that what happened to you?
It is the story.
So it's not what happened to you? Not
necessarily.
Well,
it's a lot of these things are memories that I had that I wrote down, and some of these memories could be real or they could be creation. I'm not exactly sure, but I created on top of them, used my experiences to create on top of as a foundation.
Are you sure of any experience where you went away for 20 years and you came back and you hadn't aged to be real?
How would I be totally sure if that sort of thing were real?
Are you sure that you had lunch today?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you as sure as having lunch today as you were about any of these experiences like the 20 and back?
Like I said, the 20 and back is my creation. It's a part of my intellectual property. Me creating it means it came out of me and that it is my story and it was never anywhere before. Makes it my intellectual property.
That's not my question. My question is, today you went to lunch, right?
Well, listen, I have told you
hey,
that I made up stuff on top of it, and in this book it says so. So, yes, I did make up stories about the secret space program, extrapolated off of my experiences that I told you about earlier.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
When all of this came out in 2022, this caused a massive rift between the more optical cabals of Knapp and Corbell and the cabals of Stephen Greer, Wilcock, and Corey Goode. Since this event happened, the Knapp and Corbell cabal have really started to press for changing the name from UFO to UAP disclosure in order to distance themselves from the so-called woo-woo UFO community. The problem is that all of these UFO grifters were at some point a part of the same network. They are all well aware of the various wannabe UFO cult leaders and swindlers that they indirectly promote and protect with their cabal. And while Corey Goode has largely lost most of his relevancy, like a hydra, more grifters have popped up in his place. Just to name a few, there's Lou Elizondo, Linda Moulton, Ross Coulthart, and of course, our dear cult leader, Jim Charles. But there are so many of these various wannabe UFO cult leaders that it's genuinely overwhelming how widespread this grift has become. And this video is quite literally the tip of a massive iceberg. And that is the dark secret behind UFO disclosure. The reality is, it is nothing more than a cabal of various grifters using each other as sources to make a whole bunch of money. And they even got the US Congress in on the grift.